"You need a home, and I need a mommy," said the little girl to the mail-order bride left at the station. Dakota Territory, winter of 1887. Snow swept in from the north like a living thing, swirling and clawing at the wind-battered rail station. The air bit through wool. Even the thick scarf wrapped around Linda Whitford's neck did little to stop the cold from sinking into her bones. The platform boards had turned slick with ice, and every step threatened to send her sprawling. The train that had carried her across half the country gave one last shrill whistle, then vanished into the white horizon, leaving her utterly alone. Linda tightened her grip on the carpetbag in her gloved hand. Inside it was everything she owned in the world: 2 changes of clothes, a well-worn Bible, and the stack of letters that had brought her here. She had reread them so many times she could recite them by heart, every line written by a farmer named Thomas Hale, promising her a home, a hearth, and a new beginning. But Thomas Hale wasn't here. The stationmaster, an elderly man with a drooping mustache, glanced at her over the counter as he stamped tickets. "You Linda Whitford?" he asked, his voice rough as gravel. "Yes," she said, her breath misting in the bitter air. He shook his head slowly. "No one came a-skin for you. Best get yourself to the boarding house in town. Storm's comin'." Linda's heart sank. Had Thomas changed his mind? Had something happened to him? She had no way to know. She pressed the letters tighter to her chest, as though the paper itself could give her courage. Just then, a small voice cut through the howl of the wind. "Are you the lady from the train?" Linda turned, startled, to find a little girl no more than 6 years old standing on the edge of the platform. The child's cheeks were red from cold, and her woolen mittens were frayed at the tips. Her brown eyes were wide and solemn, far too serious for her age. "Yes," Linda said gently. "And who might you be?" "My name's Annie." The girl took a hesitant step forward. "You need a home, and I need a mommy." Linda knelt down, startled and moved all at once. "Where's your family, Annie?" The child's lower lip trembled. "Pa says I can't stay alone, and he says I need someone kind. Are you kind?" Linda blinked back sudden tears. She had come to this desolate place searching for someone to claim her, to give her a place to belong. And now here stood a little girl, shivering in the snow, asking for the very same thing. "I try to be," Linda whispered. Before she could say more, the wind slammed into them, driving sharp flakes into their faces. A tall figure emerged from the storm, a broad-shouldered man in a heavy coat, his hat pulled low. He strode across the platform, boots crunching on ice. "Annie," he called sharply. "Get away from there." The girl ran to him, clutching his hand. "Pa, this is her. This is the lady I told you about." Linda rose to her feet, her heart pounding. So this was the man, but not Thomas Hale. This stranger's face was hard, carved by wind and worry, and his blue eyes swept over Linda with a guarded, measuring look. "You Linda Whitford?" he asked. "Yes," she said, her voice steady though her knees felt weak. "I'm Jacob Hale," he said shortly. "Thomas was my brother." The name hit her like a blow. "Was," she echoed faintly. Jacob's jaw tightened. "He passed 2 weeks ago. Fever took him fast." The icy wind roared around them, but Linda barely felt it. All the letters, all the promises, the dreams she had clung to through endless miles of track, gone in a single sentence. Jacob looked at her with something that wasn't quite anger, but wasn't kindness either. "I came because Annie wouldn't stop talkin' about meetin' you. She says you ought to come with us." Linda glanced down at the little girl, who stared back with fierce hope in her eyes. A storm was bearing down. She had no home, no husband waiting, and no idea what tomorrow would bring. But when Annie's mittened hand slipped trustingly into hers, Linda knew only one thing for certain. She couldn't turn away. The cold wind pressed against Linda Whitford's cheeks as she followed the little girl across the snow-packed platform. Each step crunched sharply, the sound echoing off the empty station walls. The girl, no taller than Linda's waist, walked with surprising determination, as if she had been waiting all her life for someone to follow her home. Where are we going? Linda asked, clutching the handle of her carpetbag. The icy air stung her throat, making her voice hoarse. My house, the child replied without looking back. Her small boots left neat prints on the snow-dusted plank. It's not far. Papa said someone would come. I told him you'd be pretty. Linda blinked, startled. Your papa? The girl nodded, a quick, decisive gesture. He's waiting. He said I could choose. I choose you. Choose me? The words lodged in Linda's chest, warm and painful all at once. She had crossed 2,000 miles to marry a man she had never seen, hoping at least to belong somewhere. Yet here was a child, alone, certain, claiming her with a confidence Linda herself had never felt. As they stepped off the platform and onto the rutted street, the wind carried the smell of wood smoke and horses. A few dim lamps glowed in windows, throwing patches of gold onto the snow. Does your papa live in town? Linda asked, struggling to keep pace. Her skirts dragged against icy drift. No. Outside, the girl said matter-of-factly. But we have a wagon. Sure enough, a dark shape waited near the end of the street. A man stood beside it, broad-shouldered, his hat pulled low against the wind. The horse stamped and snorted, tossing its head. Papa! The girl called, breaking into a run. The man turned, his face shadowed, then lifted his head as Linda approached. His eyes, gray as the winter sky, swept over her quickly, unreadable. This her? He asked, his voice low and rough. The girl nodded fiercely. This is her. I told you she'd come. Linda swallowed, suddenly aware of how alone she truly was. No train, no station master, no way back. Just this stranger, his daughter, and the vast Dakota winter closing in. I'm John McAllister, the man said, giving her a brief nod. You must be Miss Whitford. Yes, Linda said, her voice steadier than she felt. Then let's get you out of the cold. He reached for her bag without waiting for permission, set it in the wagon, and helped her climb up. The little girl scrambled in beside her, smiling as though she had already won something precious. As the wagon jolted forward into the snow-bound night, Linda felt the weight of miles and choices settling on her shoulders. Somewhere ahead, in a house she had never seen, her new life waited, for better or for worse. The wagon rattled over frozen ruts as the wind howled across the open prairie. Linda drew her cloak tighter, grateful for the little girl pressed warmly against her side. Moonlight glinted off endless drifts of snow, turning the world to silver and shadow. John McAllister held the reins loosely, his broad shoulders rigid beneath his coat. He didn't speak, and Linda didn't dare break the silence. Only the horse's steady breath and the creak of the wheels marked the passing miles. After a long stretch, the girl, bright-eyed despite the cold, looked up at Linda. My name's Annie, she announced. Linda smiled faintly. That's a lovely name. You're going to like our house, Annie continued. It's big. And Papa built it himself. John cleared his throat, glancing briefly at Linda. It's sturdy. That's what matters. His voice was even, but there was something unspoken in it, as though he'd had to defend that house before. They left the faint lights of town behind, following a narrow road flanked by dark pines. At last, a low shape appeared ahead, a farmhouse, lamplight glowing faintly in the windows. Smoke curled from the chimney, trailing into the winter sky. John brought the wagon to a stop and swung down. Stay there, he said, coming around to help Linda. His hand, rough and warm, closed around hers for only a moment before he released her and lifted Annie to the ground. The door opened as they approached, spilling golden light across the snow. A stocky older woman with a kerchief tied over her hair stepped out, wiping her hands on her apron. Evening, she said briskly. You must be Miss Whitford. Yes, Linda managed. And you are? Mrs. Hanley. I keep house for Mr. McAllister. Supper's hot. Best come in before you all freeze. Inside, the air was blessedly warm, filled with the scent of stew and fresh bread. The room was plain but clean, with a stone hearth, heavy beams, and simple pine furniture. A rifle rested above the door, a silent reminder of where they were. Linda removed her cloak, suddenly self-conscious under John's steady gaze. He seemed to be measuring her, weighing something she could not yet name. Annie tugged Linda toward the table. "Sit by me. Papa, tell her she can." John's mouth twitched, almost a smile. "You heard the boss," he said quietly. They ate in silence, except for Annie's cheerful chatter. Linda tried to taste the food, but her mind was a storm. Who exactly was John McAllister? What kind of man let his daughter choose a bride for him? And what had happened here, on this lonely farm, before she arrived? When supper was done, Mrs. Hanley showed Linda to a small upstairs room with a narrow bed and a single quilt. "You'll be wanting your rest," she said. "Plenty to do come morning." Left alone, Linda sat on the edge of the bed, listening to the low murmur of voices below. The floorboards creaked as John moved about, his heavy steps slow and deliberate. Annie's laughter floated up the stairs, bright as a bell. Linda lay back at last, staring at the rafters. She had come for marriage, for a promise of belonging. Yet nothing about this house felt certain, except perhaps the little girl who had claimed her without hesitation. Outside, the wind rose again, rattling the windows like a warning. The wind howled across the empty prairie as the days shortened and the nights turned colder. The small cabin stood like a lone sentinel in the sea of grass, its rough-hewn logs weathered but sturdy. Inside, the fire burned steadily, throwing orange light over the walls and the few belongings that made this place a home. Clara moved quietly around the single room, setting a kettle on to boil. The air smelled faintly of wood smoke and the bread she had baked earlier. Emily sat at the table, her chin resting on her small hands, watching Clara with wide, solemn eyes. "You look tired, Mommy," Emily said softly, using the word she had begun to favor. Clara froze for a moment before forcing a smile. "I'm just busy, sweetheart. Winter's coming fast. We need to be ready." Emily nodded as though she understood every bit of that burden. She pushed her rag doll across the table and whispered to it, as if sharing a secret. Later that night, when the wind rattled the shutters, Clara lay awake. She thought of the letter she had not yet answered, the one from the agency back east asking if she had safely arrived and found her husband. Her husband, the man she had traveled all this way to marry. The man who had never appeared at the station. Her breath caught at the thought. What if no one came? What if she had uprooted her life for nothing? Emily's soft breathing from the corner steadied her heart. Whatever happened, Clara would not leave this child alone. The next morning brought thin sunlight and a bitter chill. Clara bundled Emily in a wool shawl and stepped outside to fetch water. Hoarfrost clung to the grass, sparkling like glass in the early light. That was when she saw him, a lone rider cresting the hill, his horse moving slow but sure. Clara's breath caught in her throat. Was this the man she had been waiting for? Or a stranger passing through? The rider drew closer. His coat was worn, his hat pulled low, but his eyes were sharp as he dismounted near the fence. "Ma'am," he said, tipping his hat slightly. "Name's Daniel Hart. I believe you're expecting me." Clara gripped the water bucket tighter. Emily peeked out from behind her skirt. "I've been expecting someone," Clara said carefully. "But you're late." Daniel's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "Got delayed. Bad weather up north." His gaze moved briefly to Emily. "And I see you've already made yourself company." Clara straightened her back, meeting his eyes without flinching. "This is Emily. She's staying with me." Daniel studied her for a moment longer, then nodded. "Fine by me. Let's get inside. We'll talk." Inside the cabin, the fire crackled as Daniel set down his saddlebags. He looked around the simple space, then at Clara. "You expected someone different?" he asked. "I expected someone on time," Clara replied evenly. For the first time, Daniel gave a short laugh, not unkind but edged with weariness. "Fair enough. I'm not much for letters or promises. But I came, didn't I?" Emily watched the exchange with serious eyes, clutching her doll tight. Clara knew, in that moment, this man was not what she imagined. Whether that was good or bad remained to be seen. As the wind roared outside, the three of them sat down at the table. For the first time since stepping off the train, Clara felt the weight of her choices pressing hard, yet somewhere beneath it, a fragile hope began to stir. The morning broke cold and clear, the prairie glittering with frost beneath the rising sun. Linda woke to the faint sound of movement downstairs. Pulling her shawl tighter, she slipped from the bed and followed the aroma of fresh bread baking in the kitchen. Clara stood on a stool, carefully stirring something in a pot. When she heard Linda's footsteps, she turned with a wide smile. "You're awake. I wanted to make breakfast for you and Papa," she said proudly. Linda's heart warmed at the little girl's determination. "It smells wonderful, Clara. But where's your father?" "He went out to check the horses before the sun came up," Clara replied, brushing flour from her cheek. "He said he wanted to be back before you woke." Before Linda could respond, the door opened and Daniel entered, the cold wind following him inside. He shook the snow from his hat and glanced at Linda with that steady, unreadable gaze. "Morning," he said simply, setting down a basket of wood. "Clara tells me she's running the kitchen now." Linda smiled softly. "Seems I've been replaced." Daniel's lips twitched, almost a smile, but his voice remained firm. "Clara, you shouldn't be near that stove alone." "I was careful, Papa," Clara said, undeterred. "I wanted to surprise you." The small family shared breakfast together, but beneath the peaceful scene, Linda felt an undercurrent she couldn't name. Daniel was quieter than usual, and when his eyes met hers, there was something unspoken there, something almost protective, but shadowed by doubt. Later that afternoon, Linda went outside to fetch water. The wind had picked up, carrying with it the bite of approaching snow. As she returned to the cabin, she saw Daniel standing near the corral, speaking to a stranger on horseback. The man's coat was travel-worn, his face lined with hard miles. When Daniel noticed Linda watching, his jaw tightened. The stranger tipped his hat politely, then rode off without a word. "Who was that?" Linda asked carefully. "No one you need to worry about," Daniel replied curtly. "Just a man passing through." But Linda wasn't convinced. That night, after Clara had gone to bed, the silence between them grew heavier. The wind howled outside, rattling the shutters. Linda finally spoke. "Daniel, is there something you're not telling me?" For a long moment, he didn't answer. Then he looked at her, his expression serious. "There are men out here who prey on the weak," he said slowly. "Drifters. Outlaws. You and Clara need to stay close to the house when I'm not around." Linda swallowed. "Are we in danger?" "Not if I can help it," he said, his voice low. "But I need you to trust me." Linda met his gaze steadily. "I do trust you, Daniel." Something softened in his eyes then, just for a heartbeat before he looked away. "Good. Then keep Clara inside tomorrow. I have to ride into town." The next day dawned gray and heavy with snow clouds. Linda stayed near the window, watching for Daniel's return. Hours passed, and when he finally rode back, his coat was dusted white and his face grim. Clara ran to greet him, but he held her close a moment longer than usual, as if reassuring himself she was safe. Linda caught the look in his eyes, not fear exactly, but the quiet resolve of a man who knew trouble was coming. As night fell, the first flakes of snow began to fall, swirling in the wind like silent warnings.